Welcome back, everybody. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons Turf Wars. The reason for this, and the reason I asked Bill Sylvie to come on, aka the Dungeon Delver, who's our first edition D&D expert. Um, reason I wanted to dive into this is yesterday I posted something about fifth edition and ultimately the new edition of Dungeons and Dragons coming out on one of the social platforms, and the comments got, let's just say, nuts on a few occasions. One person felt it was made them very sad that I would buy something from Wizards of the Coast. And I was like, why would it make you? I actually asked the person, I was trying to be nice. I said, okay, why would it make you sad that I purchased something to play a game in my home that you're not invited to? I don't understand that. And the person came back with the most reductio absurdum thing I'd ever heard. Well, slavery and blood diamonds make me sad too. And I'm like, dude, we're not talking about slavery and blood diamonds here. We're talking about a game of imaginary elves and dwarves and kenders and fighters and magic users. Oh my. Um, so it kind of got me to the point where I was thinking, when I was playing in the 80s and 90s, we had to go grab people off the street and say, hey, do you want to play this game? This is cool. You had to yank people in, and now we're shoving people out the door. I don't understand. So I was talking to Bill, and he told me that, hey, the edition wars have been going on since first edition, and they have been, but he knows it better. So I'm going to throw it to Bill and let him do a little history of the edition wars, if you will.
Okay, so one man's perspective of the edition wars. If you go all the way back, I mean all the way back to original D&D, not first edition AD&D, which released in between 77 and 79. I mean original D&D that started back then. Um, OD&D in 1974 was originally released in a box set. I've got one up here. I'm not going to grab it because stuff will fall. Um,
These were the ones that were stapled together on
they
Gary's
were
kitchen table.
stapled together and then boxed up in Gary's basement.
Mhm.
The OD&D rules were very quickly supplemented with supplements. And there were a lot of people who thought that it was too much, that it was too big of a change, that TSR was cashing in and that sort of thing. And they roundly rejected it. And then because the rules back then were a little more open to interpretation, there were people who played D&D a certain way. There were, this might amuse you to know, Tim. I think it was, how was it, Caltech? I don't remember, but one of the big West Coast technical universities had two giant Dungeons and Dragons clubs that hated each other
Gee, what's that
because
like?
because of how one group preferred to play original D&D even before the supplements came out. So
See,
this
I'm going to point something out. See, bro, SR guys, you weren't the first ones to hate people.
no, not by a long shot. So this has gone on. So to move things up into the electronic age, when AD&D came out, um, it more or less stayed unchanged if you were ignoring Dragon Magazine uh, and anything that
And
wasn't.
by AD&D, you're talking about this.
I'm talking about that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, exactly. Anything that wasn't Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide, uh, you know, if you were not looking at that, the game had stayed unchanged since it was first wholly released by 1979. So in 1986, the 85, 86, for reasons that go beyond the scope of this discussion, um, Unearthed Arcana was published. Now, I know Tim's old enough to remember this. Some of our viewers might not be. Um, it still exists, not so much that you know it's still accessible. There was a computer discussion forum on the earliest internet back when it was ARPANET. The forum itself still exists. It's called Usenet.
Oh, dear God, that does go back a ways.
One of the first discussions about Dungeons and Dragons on Usenet in 1985, when Unearthed Arcana dropped, were people griping about Unearthed Arcana because it changed the game. When second edition came out, I was out of D&D at that point, but I am absolutely sure there were people who dug their heels in and said, not no, but hell no, you don't get rid of my half orcs, you don't get rid of my assassins, you don't, you know, I don't want to eat. I am entirely certain, and I know for a fact that by 2000, uh, when I when I officially really got back into AD&D, I'd started a little bit in the mid late 90s, but by 2000, when third edition came out, I was kind of on the bubble about, do I want to go with the new edition or do I want to play the old stuff? I felt that the old stuff had better verve to it. It more spoke to me, so I went that way. But
So before we move off of this for a second, I want to
okay.
point something out. I watch a lot of streaming video about these edition wars and people just screaming at each other. Because
Mhm.
what I find it kind of entertaining that they will scream at each other. But I showed up in the comments one night when somebody tried to spout off about, oh, well, these half races didn't show up until fifth edition. And I pulled out this book and I was like, I'm
Yeah,
in the comments going,
half
I'm
orc,
looking at
half
the early
elf.
one going, there's half elves and half orcs right here. Like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, I'm
I
holding the book. So,
mean, half elves originally showed up in supplement one Greyhawk for OD&D, so I don't know what that person was on about.
but my point is, these edition wars get to the point where people just spout stuff for the sake of being angry.
Yeah,
And I think it's more of a, hey, I'm unhappy and I want you to be unhappy too, which makes me sad. Right. Because if you look at it in a way of the people who were like, oh, I'm sad because, you bought something from Wizards of the Coast. I'm like, is your life really so devoid of interesting stuff that you have to be upset with how I play a game to the point where it makes you sad?
that's
I'm like,
and that's a very valid point, Tim. But when third edition dropped, I noticed something is I have tried to be, and I should try a lot harder to be the happy first edition AD&D warrior. Not your preferred Dungeons and Dragons sucks and you shouldn't play it, but my preferred Dungeons and Dragons rocks and you should play it. That really is the mode that I should be in. But when I was a Johnny come lately and relearning advanced D&D, all of the responses I was getting on Usenet, web forums weren't really quite a thing by this point. Um, but through various avenues, let us say, Usenet being one of them, was, look, just shut up. Third edition's coming out. And you won't have to worry about this crap anymore. And I'm like, wait a minute. I like this stuff. And when I offered that opinion that I like this stuff, I like the old stuff, um, hitting just the wrong people. Uh, I it it well, I hate to use this phrase, but it triggered some folks.
yeah.
And so suddenly I was like, well, no, I'm not gonna sit here and let you demean me because I like this. And I let myself get caught up in it.
Mhm.
And I fell for a trap, uh, that I will caution people, I'll warn people, use me as an example. If I had written more D&D adventures and less edition war crap back in the dawn of the 2000s, I would probably have 5 dozen free modules to share with you guys instead of 5. Um, but when third edition went down and fourth edition came out, Wizards of the Coast didn't help the situation with how they marketed fourth edition, because they got in on the edition wars too
So,
and marketed as, you've been playing D&D wrong for all these years and we finally have the right edition. So
So
play this one.
let me add something here real fast. So
Oh, sure, sure.
Richard Witters, right, the king of goblins, if you will,
Yes,
he
yes.
put it very well one day on a, it was either a stream or someplace I was talking to him. Um, the difference between this edition and this edition, right, as you go forward in editions from the one Bill has on the shelf behind him that was stapled together through fifth edition and soon to be sixth, it gets more lawyery as you progress. Okay, at least that's my take on it. A
Yep.
fourth edition, they tried to turn the whole thing into Magic the Gathering, and that was just silly. But it does get more rule restrictive. So I like the sort of rule free version that's sort of more sandboxy like
Hmm.
the earlier editions. My kids like the rule lawyery version because it solves fights at the table, but they're teenagers and it's just a
Right,
different thing.
right.
Sixth edition, from what I'm hearing, is also going to be a bit more rule lawyery because they've expanded out the rules. And the only thing that you can do if you're adding stuff is make it more
Hmm.
rule lawyery in a way. I like the sandboxy part. So that's why I like the first and second and third editions because they weren't quite as, okay, here's how you do it, right? You got to do this, you got to say that, you got to do this. So
Hmm.
that to me is the actual difference between them. It became sort of this pure imagination thing down to, okay, here's how you go from point A to point B to point C, right?
Right,
It gets more
right.
restrictive. So for anybody who's not familiar with the edition wars, what has happened is there's been more rules added over the years, which kind of makes it less
Hmm.
creative time, if that makes sense.
And there's, there's been a tonal shift that I'm not crazy about, but I will say that tone is something that you can bring to the table. Rules are frameworks.
Mhm.
If you stuck the 5e rules in the cover of the 1e Dungeon Master's Guide and could summon up the spirit of Gary Gygax to explain the 5e rules, I would be willing to bet that at least a quarter of us old grognards would say, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. So presentation is everything, but um
We could do a deep
it
fake of Gary and bring him back from the dead. I mean,
let's not and say we did.
hey, I was getting pretty good. I
I'm
mean, we could
friends
do
with some of the Gygax family. I don't want to get in trouble with him, Tim.
it.
But I will say that the availability of not just retro clones like Ozric Swords and Wizardry, which are reimaginations of AD&D First Edition and original D&D, and there are retro clones for almost every other flavor of D&D out there. Um, so even setting that aside, you can go on Drive Through RPG, or you can get them off Wizard Site, which is really just a fork of Drive Through RPG's catalog. Um, and buy and play any edition of D&D you want to.
They're still out there, right? I mean,
Any edition. And if you hate Wizards of the Coast so much that you won't give them one thin dime of your money, go pay $200 for a used beat up Dungeon Master's Guide and 75 to $100 for a player's handbook and 75 to $100 for a monster manual and then 50 to $80 each for the classic modules if that's the route you want to go. I'm not here to tell people how to spend their money, but the point is, like, when a new edition is released, there's not some cackling madman who slaps a gated switch. He opens up the acrylic box and slaps a big red button, and all the previous editions disintegrate. Okay. It's not like the Forced March where my 486 has been running fine for years. Why do I have to upgrade to a Pentium if I want to get the best experience at a Windows 95? It's not like that at all. It is not like that at all. There hasn't been a better time to just play the edition of D&D you love. And the more time you spend online screeching at people about the editions that you don't love is less time that you could be inventing brand new ways to crush your characters to death with an owl bear hug.
no owlbears are allowed, man. Come on, that's I like a hug as much as the.
Stampede them with Kender. How about
So
that,
there's
Tim?
there's an inside joke there for anybody watching this doesn't get it because Bill is the DM on the Tuesday night game that I'm part of. He crushed me to death with an owlbear. Now, the funny part to that is the owlbear has this multiple attacks where it has a beak attack, two claw attacks, and in the early editions, it had a hug attack where it could grab you and hold on and crush you to death while you're
Mhm.
not able to breathe or attack back. Interestingly, in later editions, the owlbear no longer has the hug attack. It goes away. But there's no way on the planet TSR, I'm sorry, Wizards of the Coast is no longer TSR, can come to your house and say, you're not allowed to use the owlbear hug. They're never going to stop you from doing that because the original owlbear publications are still out there. And if you wanted to put an owlbear hug into a fifth edition game, go ahead. That's the beauty of Rule Zero, right? Rule Zero,
Yes.
Bill. You want to tell people what that one was? You probably know it better than I do.
Um, well, what people commonly refer to as Rule Zero, my Rule Zero is actually the afterword in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and you guys probably know it as well as I do. But it starts off with Gary saying, "It is the spirit of the game, not the letter of the rules, which matters. As you adhere to major systems." And, he goes on to basically say, don't let rules lawyers run your games. As long as you're adhering to major systems, ordering your campaign world, your players, and so on, you're playing D&D right. Um, and that is the rule zero. But a lot of people will broaden that out even more and say, if it's fun, put it in your game. If it's cool, put it in your game.
So there's an account everybody I think should follow because it's interesting over on Twitter and here on YouTube. Harmony Ginger, who both of us know.
Hmm.
She had somebody, she's DMing a game, and somebody came to her and goes, hey, instead of a tavern, can we start like we're hungover and we don't remember how we got where we are, but we know the party at the pub was really good. So instead of starting at a tavern, can we start with no memory of how where we got where we are? As she was talking about on Twitter this morning, I'm like, that's actually kind of genius. But I've never seen that in an adventure. But that's the kind of imagination that you can have playing this game. You can come up with these weird scenarios, and the less rule lawyery it is, you know,
Hmm.
the better. And I think that's the kind of thing that we all grew up sort of wanting to play is that board games are nice, war games are nice, which is sort of what Dungeons and Dragons came out of, but they're very restrictive in what you do. This opens the envelope of creativity to be kind of anything you come up with, including starting a game while you're hungover and you don't know how you wound up laying next to this half elf and you don't even remember the half elf's name, right? I mean, any of those things can happen, and
Hmm.
your dungeon master can pull a fast one on you and make sure that the dwarf is sitting right next to a kender, even though most dungeon masters don't like kender. I get it, but you can do that for fun. And I don't know any other game system that actually is like that. So I don't under the thing that gets me about the sort of turf battles and the hey, you're playing wrong. There's really no wrong way to play. We're talking about a game where you can start, recreating the movie The Hangover, but with elves and dwarves and fighters and
Hmm.
magic users, right? We're not
Right.
talking about something where it's like, chess or checkers or chess or backgammon or something where it's very specific rules and strategies involved. It's a much different beast. So I don't know. I think some of these turf battles get kind of silly because it's meant to be anything sort of kind of anything goes within a specific framework instead of, oh my God, you move 3 feet to the left and you can only move 2.5 feet to the left. Well,
Mm.
okay, you got me, right? I moved 6 inches further than I should have. Right. I don't know. It just bugs me when people kind of go after it with like this sort of vitriol of, you know, you're not allowed to call what you do Dungeons and Dragons because you're not doing it exactly the way I tell you you are. It drives me
Sure.
insane. So
Sure. And the only thing I would say to your erstwhile commenter who said you buying stuff from Wizards made them sad, um, is now, to be fair, to give the kids their innings, as they say, uh, Wizards of the Coast has gotten up to some pretty terrible things in 2023. I mean,
that's fair.
we, they burned down the OGL, or they tried to. They sent the Pinkertons after a guy for receiving a pre-release set of Magic the Gathering cards and doing an unboxing on his YouTube channel.
which by the way they sent to him, which was even weirder. Um,
Uh,
so it
they
wasn't like
sent
somebody stole it. It was actually sent to him by their PR department, which is
Well, they sent it to a comic shop, a comic game store, and the comic game store sold it to the guy. But still, it was a breakdown. It was not a let's send our private security force after a guy worthy, but
yeah.
they
That was probably somebody at Wizards that just didn't think the matter through, right? They just jumped the gun
I
and said,
would
"Oh my
agree
God."
with you.
Yeah.
I would absolutely agree with you. But they've they did some pretty lousy stuff, and I I can definitely understand, hey, I'm not going to support this company. I mean, look what's going on with Adobe right now, right? I mean, I would understand somebody who said, I'm not giving any money to Adobe right now. But if somebody says, look, this is my tool set,
Mhm.
I use this. If somebody came to me and said, Bill, I really want to play first edition AD&D, not Osric, not Swords and Wizardry. I really want to play first edition AD&D. I'm going to go buy the stuff off Drive Through RPG. Well, part of that money is going to go to Wizards of the Coast. I'm not going to grab that person and shake them by the shoulders and say, how dare you? How absolutely dare you? Okay. It is still the least expensive entry point, unless you have some crazy uncle who has the books on their shelf and gives them to you for free.
And in PDF form, some of the things are like $3. I mean, they're not
Yeah,
off the charts
yeah.
crazy. They're
I mean, but you can with print on demand fill your shelf with this stuff. I understand the the icky feeling that somebody might get supporting Wizards of the Coast, given how lousy they behaved in 2023. But at the
so
same time, the Sturm und Drang and saying, Tim Imholt, you're a bad person for
I
doing
know.
that. Come on.
So my other favorite part of the people that are the most guilty of telling other people, "Oh, I'm sad you bought this stuff," or "How dare you," if you go look at their social media feed, you find something very curious. It's like, "Oh, this $100 book by Wizards is just a money grab. You should buy this other $100 book, which I'm the co-author of, that clearly isn't a money grab. And you should support my Kickstarter for the next book I'm writing that clearly isn't a money grab. That's on the very same topic of the one Wizards is putting out. But ignore that, right? That is
Right.
clearly those two things are not interrelated in any way, shape, or
No,
form.
no, 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 not at all. Your RPG dollar, I realize, is very limited, but it just so happens that I have a book for sale too. Kidding aside, I do say support small creators, but if the best argument you got is I don't like Wizards of the Coast,
So
that if the first argument you have isn't my thing is great and here's why, rather their thing is bad and here's why, buddy, get a new PR department.
so let's dig into that a little bit, right?
Okay,
Because it's my
sure.
channel, we can dig into whatever I feel like.
Damn
I've
straight.
written a bunch of fiction books. This whole stack of them sitting up next
Mm-hmm.
on the shelf. Um, and when I first started writing them, my marketing ploy was the same as everybody else. It's like, oh hey, I wrote this book, go buy it. Right? And you see a lot of indie writers who have no idea how to market. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing because when I started, I didn't either. But I didn't stick with the same ploy, which is what I see a lot of indie RPG creators doing. Hey, help me out, buy my book. That is not a sales pitch. For me to say, hey, help me out buy my book, that might get my mother to buy a copy, a couple of friends, but it's not going to really do much sales. So the first couple of years I was writing books, I think I sold 60 or 70 in 3 years. Um, I now have 25,000 paid copies in circulation and 4.5 million pages on Kindle Unlimited because instead of saying, hey, buy my book, I'm like, hey, look, here's this book, Forest of Assassins. It's about Navy SEALs in Vietnam before we admitted Navy SEALs existed and before we admitted we were in Vietnam, right? So that gets people to actually look at it, take a chance on it. And, you put a free chapter out on your website. Next thing you know, you're selling books. And, I can look at Kindle any given day and I'm selling as many books a day as I used to sell in a month. Right. But what I did was I went from, hey, help me out, buy my book. It really is good for me, to here's why. And if you can't express why I want to buy your book, my odds are I'm not going to want to buy it in the first place unless you're just like a personal friend. And it's like, in that case, I may as well just slip you $20 because, who cares,
Speaking
right?
of which, Tim, could you slip me $20?
Actually, you know what's funny is I was cleaning out some of my dad's stuff. So everybody who doesn't know, I'm cleaning out stuff because of a move and a divorce and everything else. My dad has this whole pile of silver and gold certificates that he kept because he wanted to prove that the government was a complete liar. Because at one point you would be able to actually take your silver or gold certificate, go turn it in, and get an equivalent amount of silver or gold. So
Yes.
dad kept this whole stack of them. I found a bunch of 20s in there, and I'm like, wow, those things on Amazon are actually or eBay are now going for real money. So as a collectible, those things are actually worth more than the face value of the certificate in the first place.
Excellent.
Complete aside thing, because the reason I wanted to point that out is some of the stuff about scarcity that comes up, and people are like, "Oh, it's expensive to buy the originals. You can go to Drive-Thru RPG." These things, when they were printed, a lot of these early edition stuff are not rare. Okay,
No,
there were
they're not.
hundreds of thousands of these things printed out there, including this one right here. Okay, there
The
are
unexpurgated deities and demigods, the print run was in the I have heard 60 to 250,000.
okay. Let's take the
That's an
midpoint.
enormous amount of books.
Call it 100,000, right? There's a ton of them out there, and not a day goes by when I'm not maybe not a day, but I've been at Half Price Books a lot because I go there because I enjoy it. In the
Mhm.
last year, I've probably seen a half a dozen, just at
Yeah.
my local stores.
I've
Right? So
owned 13 of that at one time.
with Cthulhu in it, right?
Yeah, but because people would give them to me. You like AD&D, Bill? Here you go. We I live proximate to Disney World, and when our kids were young, one day we were like, "Oh, we're going to take the kids to Disney today, but yes, there's gas and there's parking and that." So I said, "Hang on a second, huh?" I went on Facebook and I said, "Hey, I don't remember what I asked, like $60 a piece, $50 a piece, not what people charge for them now." I sold like 8 of them, money into the PayPal, and we were gone. The unexpurgated deities and demigods are not rare. People have built up this mythology around them that they're super rare, and there was a lawsuit, and copies had to be pulled and destroyed. No.
So the difference, if you're not aware, is two things got pulled out: Cthulhu
Mm-hmm.
and one
Elric,
other. Oh,
the Elric of Melnibone.
right. So they got pulled out because it was a copyright violation from I don't remember who, but I'm
No, it was okay. So I'm not sure how far down the rabbit hole we want to go, but it was actually Brian and Kevin Bloom's fault. There was no lawsuit. Everybody at Chaosium was happy. Jim Ward at TSR was happy. Brian and Kevin Bloom, who were in charge of TSR, they had basically stuffed Gary in a corner. Brian and Kevin Bloom were the ones who screwed it up. The
all right.
mythology about lawsuits and
So
legal threats and that sort of thing,
so
completely false.
two things got pulled out, right?
Right.
Cthulhu and
Yeah.
the other. And honestly, I don't think I've ever come across either of those things in a game. So Cthulhu, I've got a board game about Cthulhu, which is an interesting
Mhm.
character because it drives everybody insane and you wind up
Right.
stabbing each other. But
Right.
you can do similar stuff with evil wizards, and it's arguably same gameplay. But that's the thing is we get these edition wars, we get these sort of turf battles, and everybody's convinced their story is right and they're doing it the right way and versus the wrong way. And then there's the Gary versus Arneson arguments, which I don't want to get into. Um, and because that's a whole can of worms that's just not worth opening. But the point to the whole video today is that look, there's no real right camp or wrong camp in this stuff. There are preferences. I prefer to play first edition. My kids prefer to play fifth edition because that's just the way it works. Would I like them to play first edition? Sure. Maybe someday we'll get them. We'll use fifth edition as a gateway drug to pull them over into the early editions.
There you go.
Um, but there's to physically, not physically, but to verbally attack people, and I got called names that I won't repeat on YouTube because it does downgrade you if you use the wrong words. That for somebody to tell a 52-year-old dude some of the stuff I got told yesterday because I dared to hold a new version of an adventure, which by the way, this is one of the fifth edition adventures that's actually really good. Tomb of
Mhm.
Annihilation. It's a pretty
Of
solid
course
one.
it is. It's built on Tomb of Horrors, one of the best adventures of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I've got an equally one that I got one on the other side of the spectrum that's just terrible. I'm not even going to talk about, but there's good adventures in fifth editions. There's terrible adventures in fifth edition. I can say the same thing about first. There's fantastic adventures,
Sure.
and there's not so good ones. I like the Dragonlance adventures that were out. Bill does not because they're kind of dictatorial in how you have to play. That's just a preference.
I'm not a huge fan. I don't think they're terrible, but
But they're not great, right? So
no, not in my opinion. No.
the slavers are, in your opinion, the better thing to go do, and they keep whacking characters, so you will see if Snake survives. But my next character, by the way, is either named Circumference or Joan Wilder. I can't decide which one.
We have a circumference already, so you're gonna have to argue with
I'm sorry, Sir
things.
Osis. I was Sir
Sir
Osis.
Osis.
Sir
Okay, I was gonna
Osis. Sir
say.
Osis, and he hails from an area called Liver. Uh, but so yeah, we'll have a Sir Osis of Liver just for fun. Or Joan Wilder. I can't decide which one. Uh, just because I want to hear you do the Joan Wilder voice all the time.
Just Joan.
Just Joan, just Joan.
Just Joan.
But the point is that, if you're so kind of wrapped around the axle that you must play this game this way, that you're going to call people names, I just think you need to take a deep breath and examine yourself a little bit, take a step back from the anger, and realize that fifth edition and later stuff might be a gateway drug over to first edition. And for the people who I see out there going, oh, they should just let, I saw this one day, they should just let Margaret Weiss buy it. I'm like, or somebody was trying to get Dragonlance out of Wizards of the Coast. They should let Margaret Weiss buy it. And
Right.
I tagged her on Twitter. And she's like, I don't want it. So, she's a novelist. Well, she wouldn't run a gaming company. Woman's in her 70s. Come on, leave her alone. Let her do whatever she wants to do. Because running a company is hard work. And the point is that Wizards of the Coast is not turning loose of this intellectual property. They're going to have it until Hasbro dies. It's not going anywhere from the control of that multi-billion-dollar beast. It has a future, and that future is bright as long as people don't try to burn it down for the sake of burning it down. And what I see a lot of the community doing, and Bill, I'll give you the last word after this one, is I see a lot of the community try to burn down Hasbro so that they can sell their version of Dungeons and Dragons and get you to support a Kickstarter or buy an independent book. And to me, that's just bad marketing. If you've got something that adds to somebody's gameplay, enhance it, grow the industry, and be part of it. Not let's destroy this while we're building that. It's not a zero-sum game. You can get new people in. So anyway, I'll give you the last word, Bill.
Edition warring is dumb. Play the game you love. If you want more people to play it, tell them why it's awesome, not why their version sucks.
Thank you. That's what it should be. All right, so we'll leave it at that. If you haven't yet, click like, subscribe, or follow. I'll link to Bill's channel in the description. Follow him. Tuesday night game's a lot of fun. I'm in it as long as I survive. We'll see how that goes. You do a Friday night Gamma World.
Friday Night Gamma World. That's right. We're playing GW1 Legion of Gold now on Friday nights.
There you go. And tonight you've got a pretty special guest on your channel.
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night we have Rose Estes in the studio. I'm super hyped about that.
Who brought us all the choose your own adventure stuff. She took over writing Greyhawk. Right. Very prolific writer.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I probably owned every book she had out at one point. I doubt I can make that claim today, but I had a bunch of them at one point. I even have a Gamma World choose your own adventure book on my shelf.
Neat.
I didn't even know they did those. I was walking through Half Price Books one day. I saw it. I'm like, oh my God. And
I knew they did a Star Frontiers and a Top Secret, but I didn't know about Gamma World.
They had a Gamma World one. It cost me $25 to buy it, but I had
That's right. Senior moment. I had that. Light on Quest Mountain.
That's the one. So it is out there. She's a great writer. I'm a huge fan. I can't wait for that one. But anyway, thank you everybody for your time. Click like, subscribe, or follow. I'll link to Bill, and everybody have a great day.